Thank you for listening to Shulchanaruchharav.com.
Who is allowed to visit a cemetery? Is there a list of people who are restricted from visiting? May a kohen visit a cemetery under certain circumstances? What about kivrei tzaddikim? What about someone who's pregnant? May she visit a cemetery? What about a woman who's in the middle of menstruation? Can children be brought to a cemetery? Does a man have to tovel in a mikveh before visiting a cemetery? So there exist many conceptions and ideas about these groups of people that we mentioned, whether they can or cannot visit a cemetery, and we will now summarize the halacha of each one of these groups and what the restrictions truly are. So let's begin with the first case scenario, the case of a kohen. As is well known, it is forbidden for a kohen to become tamei to a mace, to step or to touch a grave, and thereby it is forbidden for him to enter a cemetery. There is, however, a way in which it is permitted for him to enter, and that is through isolating himself from the graves or from any possible grave, such as if he remains a 4 amos distance from any possible grave, or walks with a wall-like structure that is at least 10 tfachim high surrounding him, in which case he only has to distance himself 4 tfachim from the graves. By the Rebbe's oil, for example, this is what is done. They have a mechitza of 10 tfachim high by each side of the pathway, and that allows the kohen to be even within 4 amos of the grave, as long as he remains 4 tfachim distance from any grave. Another option for the kohen is to go in by car. The car itself is considered a mechitza, and thereby it isolates him from the tumah. This prohibition of a kohen visiting a grave applies even to kivrei tzaddikim. Even if the kever of the tzaddik is not within a regular cemetery, but it's its own grave, its own mausoleum, nonetheless, it is forbidden for a kohen to become impure even to the grave of a tzaddik. And he must follow the instructions we said earlier of 4 amos distance, or surrounding himself by a wall-like structure that is 10 tefach high. Next on our list, pregnant. May a pregnant woman enter into a cemetery? So this we've discussed in the past in a halacha that once featured, that from the letter of the law there is no problem for a pregnant woman to enter into a cemetery at all, and this applies even if she is a kohenes, or the wife of a kohen, and may be carrying a baby boy kohen. Nonetheless, from the letter of the law, it's permitted for her to enter the cemetery. However, practically, it is proper for the wife of a kohen to be stringent and not enter into a cemetery, if possible, while she is pregnant, especially if she knows that the gender of the child is male, even though from the letter of the law it's allowed. And some women have a custom to never enter a cemetery when they're pregnant, even if they are not married to a kohen at all. As we discussed in one of the previous lessons, although practically this is not obligatory, and one who has not received this custom does not have to abide by it, and may enter a cemetery even if pregnant, especially if it's for kivrei tzaddikim. Regarding a nida, a woman who's in the midst of the menstruation cycle, it is customary for them to avoid visiting a cemetery during those days. This halacha applies mainly to the time of the flow and not during the time that's called Shiva Nikim, where the flow has already ended and the purification process has begun. Certainly single girls may visit the cemetery outside of the menstruation cycle. In the event that a woman is in the middle of her cycle and not going to visit this kever will cause much distress, such as it's the day of a yahrzeit of a tzaddik or of a relative, then she may go and stand 4 amos away from the kever. And if this is not possible, such as she has to pass through other kvarim to get to it, then in a time of great need, it's mutter for her to be lenient even during the cycle itself. Our next case, children. May one bring children to a cemetery? So unlike the common misconception that it's forbidden or it's a danger to bring children to a cemetery, there is no source for such statement in Judaism, and while there is a common conception amongst the world that it's not a good place to bring children which represent life to a cemetery which represents death, nonetheless there is absolutely no problem in doing so according to halacha or Kabbalah, and we don't find any source which says that it shouldn't be done. This applies even if the child is of a very young age, such as a newborn. There's no problem for them to go to a cemetery with their parents. Our next and last case is regarding a balkari. Must a man immerse in a mikveh prior to visiting a cemetery? And the answer is that based on Kabbalah, as is recorded in the Paiskim, one who is impure due to nocturnal emission or due to releasing of seed of any kind, such as an intimacy with his wife, it is forbidden for him to visit a cemetery until he immerses in a mikveh. And this gets the souls in the cemetery very upset when an impure person visits them. And therefore either he should go to the mikveh or he shouldn't go to the cemetery at all, or at its best that he should stand from a 4 amos distance from the grave and pray from there. To summarize, we listed 5 different types of people which have restrictions or possible restrictions of visiting a cemetery. The first being a kohen, which we stated is prohibited from visiting a cemetery unless he stays a distance of 4 amos from the graves or has a surrounding wall of 10 tefachim around him, in which case he only has to stay 4 tefachim away from the graves. The second case regarding a pregnant woman, we said there's no problem for her to visit a cemetery, although some are accustomed not to do so, especially if she is the wife of a kohen and the fetus may be a male. Regarding a nida, a woman in midst of menstruation, the custom is for them not to visit a cemetery during the cycle itself, unless it is a case of great need, in which case they should stand 4 amos away from the kever. However, outside of the cycle, even if they're not yet ritually pure, it is permitted for them to visit. Regarding children, there is no prohibition of children visiting a cemetery when bringing their toddler along with them or infant, although some are accustomed not to do so due to their own private intuitions. Regarding a man who didn't go to mikvah, so if he has not gone to mikvah since his last emission of seed, otherwise known as a Baal Keri, it's forbidden for him to visit a cemetery, according to Kabbalah as is recorded in Paiskin, and he's either not to do so or is to stand at a 4 amos distance from the graves. For the full details of all these subjects and all the sources, citations, and references, please visit our article online or our Sefer, The Laws and Customs of Mourning, Volume 2, Chapter 31, Halacha 7.
Thank you for listening to Shulchanaruchharav.com. Our free services of making Torah knowledge available to the public depends on donors like you. Please help us continue our work through making even a small contribution at Shulchanaruchharav.com under the Daily Halacha Dedication section or in the subscription page. Also, check out our online courses and many sefarim available for purchase that will both enhance your Torah knowledge and help support our work.